All right, I think we're live. So let's just wait here until people join us. I once again started us off awkwardly. Here we are. All right, we have a couple people joining us. We've got people coming in right now. And all right. I think we can get started. Hey, everybody. I'm Stephanie Wilson, as you know, and this is Freedom Over Fascism Live. And today I'll be talking to Dr. Deborah Shushan, who I talked with a couple weeks ago, and you all probably know. She's a Middle East and U.S. foreign policy expert and senior resident affiliate. This is a great title at Georgetown Center for Jewish Civilization, where she's going to teach a class on the Israel-Palestine conflict. And she has directed Israel-Palestine policy at J Street, and among other things. So before we get started, I would like to invite all of you guys to subscribe to both of us by clicking the buttons at the top of your screen, and also keep pressing those red hearts, which will help both of us, thank you, be more visible to the folks in Substack. And as we all know, this work is hard in a lot of ways. So if you have the means to become a paid subscriber to either of us, please do that. And I want to note that Freedom Over Fascism is part of the Democracy Group and Banner and Backbone. And that's two different networks fighting for freedom and democracy. So Deborah Shushan, my badass, overeducated, anti-fascist mom of a certain age friend.
That's me.
That's you. We've talked a bunch about the Jewish American community and Israel-Palestine. And yesterday I was on with Rabbi Sandra Lawson. If some of you joined, I know Deborah was there. And you recently talked to Professor Shaul Magid at the Harvard Div School, who's my neighbor, more or less, and Dr. Ilana Stockman, who's a Jewish, who's an American-Israeli, Jewish. And both of us are witnessing in different ways how the American Jewish community is struggling in its response to Israel-Palestine, to anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, liberal Zionism, what all these things mean, and a whole lot more. So my basic premise is the Jewish community in North America fracturing? Are we facing a schism? Where are the line, and if so, where are the lines drawn?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Stephanie, thank you so much for having me. And it's really great to be on with you again. The last time we were on together, we were talking about a pretty different topic. We were actually talking about MBS, Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, coming to DC and meeting with Trump. And so it's great today to talk about a topic that is definitely near and dear to both of our hearts, Jewish American community and Israel-Palestine. And I know you mentioned that we are both badass, anti-fascist Jewish moms of a certain age. So this is something that is both, professionally interesting and important, but also like we're both raising Jewish kids and,
Right.
And I'm sure many of the folks who are watching are probably, maybe raising Jewish kids, maybe trying to be involved in the raising of Jewish grandkids and figuring out what the heck that looks like in this particular time.
Yeah. And a lot of my folks, yesterday was the first time I have directly had a conversation about the Jewish American community. Mm-hmm. I've had little comments here and there, but I have stayed away from the entire show. So now I am diving in to the Being Jewish in America series.
Oh, you crazy woman.
I know. And because most of these folks here have heard me talk about the fact that I'm Jewish, but not really delve into the problematica and the beauty and the tsuris and the mishugas of that.
People may
So
not
let's do
know
it.
what those words mean, Stephanie.
Right.
Potentially, do
I
you want to
know.
define your Yiddish terms?
Tsuris is like, okay, tsuris is like troubles. Like
Yeah.
when you talk about all the tsuris you have, it's like all my suffering and all of my troubles and oy vey's mir. And mishugas just means craziness. So we're basically want to talk about the suffering and the craziness, and because we're batshit crazy here in the Jewish community, as is every community in different ways. And so we want to talk about that. And you guys know, I've talked a lot about white Christian nationalism with people, and it turns out I've talked with a lot of people who were raised as Christian fundamentalists and are what do they call it? Deconstructing that. So this is a completely different side of what some Americans look like. But it comes into conversation and sometimes conflict. So let's start with the premise that that it's a hard time right now in the Jewish American community, and go from there.
Yeah. Well, so just 2 seconds by way of background. My entree into this is for the last, for about 8 years. I worked for, you mentioned J Street. I worked for J Street. I also worked for another progressive Israel-Palestine focused Jewish organization that used to be called Americans for Peace Now. And so, even though I'm a political scientist focusing on international relations of the Middle East by training, really had my trial by fire on the Jewish community and where we stand on Israel, Palestine, being involved with a couple of organizations that advocate for changes in U.S. foreign policy in a more, toward a more progressive positioning than U.S. foreign policy has had historically, and certainly, in recent decades. So, having said that, I think the Jewish community was never united on this issue.
The Jewish community has never been united on any issue since the beginning of time.
Exactly.
I mean, that's part of the character of being
exactly
a Jewish community.
No, that's exactly right. I would say, having said that since October 7th, so we're talking about the past, 2 years and change, it has been a very difficult time within the Jewish community. And, from my standpoint, and when October 7th happened, I was at J Street, and I had been at J Street prior to that. We have an ultra right-wing regime in Israel that's been in power, that came to power at the very, very end of 2022. And so there was an interesting dynamic that was happening after the Netanyahu government came to power, but before October 7th. I'm sure will recall, and others will, on this call will probably recall as well, but maybe not everyone. That was a period where the Netanyahu government was trying to pursue what they referred to as judicial reform. Others called a judicial overhaul or a judicial coup. And this was a period where, there were incredibly impressively large crowds
every week, mass mobilization
every Motzei Shabbat, after the close of Shabbat on Saturday night, in Tel Aviv and cities throughout Israel, protesting for Israeli democracy. And that created a really interesting moment in the Jewish community where it became maybe a little bit more clear to folks that there were multiple ways of supporting Israel. I mean, that had been clear to many of us for a very long time. But, do you support the Netanyahu government or do you support the pro democracy protesters who are at loggerheads? And there was some very interesting movement within the Jewish community of folks who seemed to be kind of processing that and actively supporting the protesters and being more critical of an Israeli government that they might have been comfortable doing previously, including some rabbis. Right. And then in the midst of that, like in the heat of that, October 7th happens. Incredible crisis, obviously, within the Jewish community in terms of this, horrific attack on Israel, 1,200 deaths, 1,200 people killed, people, 250 or so were kidnapped to Gaza. And, a moment in which you have unity within much of the Jewish community. I won't say all, but much of the Jewish community really comes together around the cause of the hostages. But that kind of begins to unravel pretty quickly in terms of the response that we saw from the Netanyahu government, which very, very quickly turns into what anyone who's being honest would admit were war crimes and atrocities. And ultimately, obviously, you have human rights and other organizations all over the place who have indicated that it's genocide, right? And so this has really really caused deep ruptures within the Jewish American community. They're not new. This is hardening some of the divisions that you'd already had between Zionists and anti-Zionists, between Zionists of different sort of stripes, folks who are kind of caught in the middle and which way do you go? And all of that, I mean, just kind of all of that for me, which was clearly in progress after October 7th over the past, 2+ years, took another turn around the election of Zohran Mamdani in New York, which became incredibly contentious, particularly just in the few weeks right before that election. When you start to have prominent New York rabbis, coming out, there were dueling rabbi letters all around Mamdani's election. And this, really fascinating question of whether a young man, Zohran Mamdani, now he's in his 30s, but he's young for you and me, Stephanie.
Yeah. Well, yes.
Who had a unquestionable history of devotion to the Palestinian cause, and has been an anti-Zionist, committed anti-Zionist for many years. What would that mean if he were to be elected the mayor of the largest Jewish city in the United States, so sort of the epicenter of American Jewry?
Well, it's the largest probably I don't know the exact numbers, but my guess is it's the largest Jewish city in the world. I don't know if Tel Aviv or Jerusalem.
If the largest is Tel Aviv,
I don't know, but it's pretty.
It's got to be pretty close.
It's got to be pretty close.
Yeah, it's got to be right. So epicenter of American Jewry for sure, and as you indicate, obviously, incredibly important place in terms of world Jewry more broadly. And so I think there's no question this is a really fractious time. You mentioned that I spoke to Shaul Magid recently. His thesis, as someone who interestingly has studied Jewish history over the millennia, is that this is a moment of schism among Jews that could parallel, the schism between Hasidim and Mitnagdim, and he gives a lot of other examples that I'm not at all qualified to talk about. But, a historic moment of schism within the community. And, and he, as a religious studies scholar, which I am not, and I take it you're not either, clarifies that schism means, I would use the term more loosely, right? But he's clear that schism actually means a situation in which you have a fracture in the Jewish community that is so serious that you have different groups that won't even associate with each other, that won't participate in the same institutions. So synagogues would have to choose one side or the other, specifically over the question of Israel, that the divide would be so serious. And his thesis is that we're not quite there yet, but that this schism is well on its way to, erupting into a full-scale schism. Yeah.
So one of the things we talked about yesterday with Rabbi Sandra is that in all of this, we have to be able to hold a lot of truths in our heads at the same time. And those truths might seem to be mutually exclusive, but aren't. And that's a question of, narrative. That is my bailiwick. How do we understand the past, knowing that lots of events are remembered differently by different groups of people? That seems like it would be kind of basic, but the general narrative of how Israel came into being, the entire Zionist movement, and Israel as a group, as a state of Jews, and there's truth in, Israel has been embattled. Israel has also occupied the West Bank and Gaza since 1967. Those are two, and after 1948, or in 48, expelled a lot of Palestinians. Those are two kinds of truths that are both true, but are at odds. So I think one of the things that I think a lot of people have trouble with is acknowledging the narrative that you've always known,
Mm-hmm.
Is not the understanding of history that others have.
Sure.
But also that they can both be right. And the other thing is that since well before the foundation of Israel, American Jewry has been deliberately conflated by American Jews with the state of Israel through, all sorts of teen tours that go to Israel, and Birthright, and having Israeli content in synagogues, and now that conflation becomes more and more problematic as the different groups understand what's going on in the world differently. And I'm trying to make that as neutral as possible, because we're going to go into much more depth. Because all of that is happening at the same time. There is both real anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and weaponized use of anti-Semitism for the purpose of furthering the right-wing governments, both in the United States and in Israel. So it's a super complex issue, and it's like in Fiddler on the Roof, where at the beginning he's like, on the one hand, Oh no, it's in the
On
middle when Chava is about to go off, whatever. On the other hand, on the other hand, on the other hand, how many hands do I have? But it's a multi-handed
Yes.
situation.
Yes, definitely multi-handed. And, so there's a lot there that you put on the table.
I'm afraid I do that.
No, it's okay. I mean, I'll like riff on a few things. So one is, you point to what I scroll down on. I take notes. I'm an inveterate note taker. So if you ever see me looking down, that's what I'm doing. And, what I put down as founding myths, right? I mean, every society, has its founding myths. Obviously, we have them here in the United States.
Where I live in Lexington, Massachusetts.
Absolutely.
We're like at the epicenter of one of the founding myths. Yeah.
Absolutely. And if you, watch Ken Burns's amazing documentary that my son is hooked on about the American Revolution.
I started it, yeah.
You get to like interrogate some of those really important foundational myths. Similarly, Israel has its foundational myths too, as every society does.
Right. And I just want to before you go on, make the distinction between a founding myth being a story that binds a group of people together with a common origin, and the idea of myth as in falsehood, like myth versus fact. So we're talking about the story that binds a group together with a common origin.
Right. And, and there is typically in those founding myths, there is some truth and some less truth. Right. And so, I mean, one of the things I think that's interesting is that, I don't want to give Israelis too much credit or spread it around, too evenly across Israelis, but there are some Israelis for sure who have been better about kind of debunking the not so accurate parts of Israel's founding myths than Jewish Americans and probably Jews throughout the diaspora beyond just the US have, right?
Right. I mean, it's been interrogated by a lot of scholars.
Absolutely.
But not necessarily that many people who are just like out there living their lives and consuming the narrative. That's just some absolutely,
which is why I don't want to say, everybody, all Israelis do. No, I mean, I don't want to overstate the case by any means, but the folks who really first started to interrogate some of those, myths about what the founding of Israel looked like, in terms of Palestinians leaving in mass numbers, and the idea that those Palestinians just kind of were encouraged to leave by their leadership, and they did so voluntarily. And it wasn't that, the pre-state militias were doing anything that was problematic. I mean, it was actually Israeli revisionist historians who, including actually one of my professors when I was at Oxford, Avi Shlaim, who's quite famous, who, went and dug into the archives in Jerusalem and well, I hate to tell you folks, that's not exactly what happened. Right. Whereas, here in the United States, those facts can be extraordinary facts. Like, for example, the fact that 750 Palestinians were expelled in 1948. In a war that was both, for the establishment of a state for a people who had just suffered a horrific genocide in which 6 million people, that's obviously that is true. And there was a lot of reason to want a Jewish state to be, or at least a national homeland, in which Jews could be safe. There was a lot of reason to want that. And at the same time, it was founded on war crimes and ethnic cleansing. I mean, these things, there are people, maybe not your audience, Stephanie, but there are certainly people who will hear what I'm saying and their, brains will explode. Right. But you're absolutely right about the necessity of grappling, right, with founding myths and with, contentious narratives and and kind of interrogate. I mean, like, my husband and I talk about this. I mean, so many, like the fact that when he was growing up and going to Hebrew school in a Reform shul, like, they would basically teach the kids that the Palestinians weren't a thing. Like, they weren't a people. They were fake. They were made up. I mean, Golda Meir, former Israeli prime minister, said as much, right? There's no such thing as Palestinians, but also they never fail to make a mistake when they have an opportunity, even though they don't actually exist.
Right.
So, they never miss an opportunity to miss an opportunity, to quote her more precisely. So, this is and let me add to this for a moment, right? We're at a moment where a lot of the kids who are now, I don't know what it makes it, like millennials or whatever, who were raised with that kind of uncritical view of Israel and, diminution of the Palestinian people, or dismissal of the Palestinian people, and, anything about, their cause, grew up and into a world in which, they had access to expanded information and recognized that the myths that they were taught, and we're talking about a lot of kids who grew up, going to either Jewish day schools or, public schools with, going to Hebrew school on the weekends and during the week, et cetera, had bar and bat mitzvahs and all of that, at some point began to feel betrayed. And like they hadn't been told the full story. And this Jewish community that raised them with these wonderful liberal social justice values had lied to them. And that's part of this like deep trauma, angst, and problematic generational rift that we're seeing today, within the Jewish community, where you have, the sort of Jewish establishment, as I like to call it, right? The, old school organizations within the Jewish community who insist on adherence to the old narrative, right? On the one hand, and lots of like litmus tests for, if you don't accept this, then you're not part of the Jewish community, and a younger generation that, I believe, I don't have the poll numbers at my fingertips. There was a fascinating poll that was taken before October 7th, before the atrocities in Gaza over the last 2+ years, in which some substantial number of younger Jews, and I want to say it was like 25%, don't quote me, have to look it up, already thought that Israel was committing genocide against the Palestinian people. And then you add on top of that, obviously, what's happened over the last 2+ years. And you really have this rift that is not fully, it's not only generational. Obviously, there are younger Jews who adhere to, a more conservative viewpoint. And there are some, older Jews. I loved my favorite part of conversation that I had with Shaul, who we've mentioned, was the part where he mentioned that, his 87-year-old mother told him she was voting for Mamdani, right? So, I mean, obviously it's not strictly generational, but it is, substantially generational. So, we have this, really serious conflict that's happening in part around these founding myths. One thing I'll just add, and then should I mention Hillary Clinton? Can I mention Hillary for a second here? And then or were you already going to get to Hillary?
I would get to Hillary, but
I'll stop.
Whatever.
I'll stop. No, you go ahead.
Well, let's just say that the American Democratic establishment, has, been a proponent of Israel for a long time. Israel has been the recipient of U.S. aid, some of it required by treaty with Egypt.
No.
Not true?
No. It's appropriated trust me, I lobbied on this. No, it's appropriated every year by Congress. And so that's
Okay.
something that, like, there was an MOU, a 10-year MOU under the Obama administration that's getting ready to run out. Really interesting questions about what's going to happen with that.
Okay.
Yes,
So
but it is true.
false information.
It is true that since the 78-79 peace treaty between Israel and Egypt, both of those countries have received billions of dollars a year in security assistance. That is true.
Exactly. So that
Yeah.
that was the point that I wanted to make.
Yeah.
And I also wanted to make the point that it, from a national security standpoint of America, it's not all one-sided. America gave Israel lots of aid, and Israel gave America things like intelligence, purchasing of armed systems, lots of things that were important to the United States as well. It wasn't just a one-sided arrangement. I just want to pause here and say, so that's the schism, but it's also a big soup that, because you can always go back and forth between, if you go back 5 years or 10 years or whatever, the situation, there's the last 150 years of history in what is now Israel and Palestine has been pretty full. It's been pretty active, and a lot has happened. And in the midst of that, not only are there competing ideas of the foundational myth, Palestinians understand Israel to be born in their pain.
Absolutely. And it was.
And it was.
It was.
Israeli, Jews, whatever, and Israelis not only were motivated by the Holocaust, but had started the Project of Zion long before the Holocaust, and would have argued at some point that no, the Holocaust was not the reason that Israel was created, that it was in the works long before. So there's that. And then there's the fact that there is real anti-Semitism in the world still, and there is real anti-Muslim sentiment and action in the world still. And so all these little things, like the clarity of a schism, to me connotes a little bit of clarity, right? That there's one side that believes this, and one side that believes this. But I think that this situation, particularly intergenerationally, different, different types of Jewry, Orthodox, conservative, Reform, non-affiliated, and also Ashkenazi, Eastern, Mizrahim.
Right.
And most American Jews are Ashkenazi, but not obviously all. So there are a lot of confounding factors that make a schism less clean.
Yeah.
Like when when Shaul was talking about a schism, he used it as an originally Christian term, where Christians at the beginning were deciding on what church doctrine was going to be. And there were some who believed one thing, some who believed another. The people who won got to control the narrative for a long, long time. So I guess what I'm doing is making it as complicated as possible to talk about, because it's a complicated issue, and it's an emotional issue for Jews and for Palestinians and for people all over the world. So, how we get to a point where we understand who's on what side? Are there two sides? Are there 15 sides? Is it like a, is it like a, you know, an earthquake crack where in the cartoons you get a canyon? Or is it like a baseball hitting a windshield where you get spider webs of cracks where some of them are more dangerous, but some of them are still more strong and secure?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'd submit that that's probably a better way of thinking about it, but it doesn't make it any easier to tease out the pieces.
Yes. So I mean, I think you raise a really good point about, the messiness of all of this for sure around lots of different axes. And you listed out some of those. The argument, I mean, the argument that Shaul makes, and obviously he can make it a lot better than I'll encapsulate it. But, in a nutshell, the argument that he makes is that I mean, he really does see it as two sides of a schism, right? Around Israel, basically, either pro-Israel with that as like a center of your Judaism, right? And people who just don't accept that, have fundamental issues with the nature of the state, don't want that to be a foundational element of their Judaism. And I don't know exactly, how he would define that, where that line comes in. But when I asked him about it, because it's interesting, like the organizations that I worked for would probably be considered within the center, right? Of, I mean, the liberal Zionist, right? So not, full on, no criticism, on sort of Zionism on one side or anti Zionist on the other side, not either one of those, but, folks who profoundly care about the state of Israel, feel attached to it, and are also, also very critical of it and anti-occupation, and extremely critical of the ways, even again before October 7th, what Israel was doing to the Palestinian people. And I, so asked Shaul, like, okay, what, if we have this schism, like what happens to that connected, conflicted middle that Josh Leifer has recently kind of, crystallized some thinking around in writing in Haaretz. And his answer was basically like, it's not going to be possible. The center can't hold. You're just going to have to go one way or the other. And so one thing that I've been following a little bit that I think is really interesting is what happens in cases where there really is a stark choice. And that's in part what makes the whole Mamdani thing so interesting, right? This is a case for, I mean, obviously you and I are not New Yorkers, so we didn't vote in the election, but for New York Jews who were voting in the election, right, they had a choice between candidates who are obviously, running on different platforms and, that weren't related to Israel. I mean, obviously, let's be clear, like Mamdani was running on an affordability platform that, and whatever, but he's running against Andrew Cuomo. And you have a choice. Those Jews, had a choice between, again, a guy with a long record of commitment to the Palestinian cause and saying things that would make even liberal Zionists very uncomfortable, right? And standing and embracing BDS, right? So that's on the one side.
Can you explain what BDS is?
Thank you. Yes, boycott, divestment, sanctions. So basically, it's a movement, as many folks will know already. But it's a movement that seeks to fundamentally change the nature of the conflict and the power imbalance between Israel and the Palestinians through using nonviolent means of boycotting, divesting from Israeli businesses and bonds and things like that, and sanctioning the state of Israel. And that is something that, the vast majority of the Jewish community has been opposed to, both, those who are uncritically pro-Israel, but also, most liberal Zionists have been opposed to BDS as well. So, okay, so you have Mamdani on one side, right? And you have Andrew Cuomo on the other side, who's just, really just totally uncritically, he went like the weekend before the election. I now forget what it was called. He went to this, like, there are probably folks who are watching us who will remember what it was called. It was like some rally, which was like the I Love Israel rally or whatever, with some like right wing figures, and like that's what he did right before the election. And so, and what's interesting is that, the liberal Zionist community in New York City, I would think, I've spoken with many of them and know that they supported Brad Lander, who's the outgoing comptroller, who is, a progressive and committed progressive Zionist who takes, very critical of the Israeli government, very anti-occupation. I happen to love Brad Lander, had a chance to speak with him on the debrief, supported him in the primary. But then, when he lost the primary and he had that cross endorsement with Mamdani, in the waning weeks of the primary, that was really fascinating, right? You have this anti-Zionist and liberal Zionist, again, in an election that should not have been principally about Israel, but for some people it was, and so that, I think, did help a number of folks who are kind of in the middle and on the fence and not totally comfortable with Mamdani decide. And also, just the fact that Cuomo is horrific and the, serial, harasser of women, right? The choice on the other side was horrible, right? And decide to vote for Mamdani, right? Even when you had folks like, and he is a very interesting figure to me in all of this, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove of the Park Avenue Synagogue, who gets up and gives a sermon, this Saturday right before the election, and spends an entire sermon that didn't have any like actual Jewish liturgical content whatsoever, but basically just tells people that, Mamdani is dangerous to the Jewish community and, at all costs, they had better not vote for him. Right. So you have that, right. And the interesting dynamic in which, a lot of liberal Zionists were able to reconcile themselves to vote for Mamdani. So that's like one interesting data point. And I just want to suggest, since I've just mentioned Elliot Cosgrove, that we now maybe are seeing another interesting development, because some folks here I know, who follow this inside baseball Jewish stuff all too closely, as, I admittedly do. Elliot Cosgrove just gave another speech a few days ago to a gathering of the American Zionist movement. And he said some things that really surprised a lot of people, that would have pissed off a lot of folks who were very happy with his pre-election speech against Mamdani, in which he said, to the Zionist movement, we have to take a hard look at certain things. And we need to realize that people who are coming from a place of love for Israel and are staunchly critical of things that the Israeli government is doing, including to the Palestinians, should be within the tent. And that was very interesting, because to me, like, that was speaking exactly to those liberal Zionists who didn't listen to him before the election and went with Mamdani. And now he's kind of trying to pull them back, but he's only willing to go so far, because to me, it's pretty clear, and I'd love to talk with him about this, that he still leaves, anti-Zionists outside the tent. So again, so it's kind of like back to the question about, whether there's a schism and are there two sides, and where, like, if there is going to be a schism, there's a question of which way that center, the liberal Zionist center, which way it's going to go. And I'm starting to see it pulled in different directions, which is very interesting to me, because that obviously is, is the community that I've been a part of. So I don't know. I mean, could it be narrowed down to just two sides? I don't know, but it's very interesting to see, where exactly that line would be drawn. And I think that's not clear yet.
Right. And as I recall, and you obviously were much more involved in this conversation, he basically said the liberal Zionists think that a democratic Israel can be salvaged if lots and stuff have changed within Israeli government, if there's a different kind of government and a different kind of policy and better, some sort of agreement between Palestinian and Jewish Israelis, and the anti-Zionist who thinks it's not salvageable at all. So that,
when you say he, did you mean, sorry,
Shaul Magid? I meant Shaul.
Shaul Magid. Okay, got it.
Which I think is very interesting language, because is it salvageable? One, it says, should it be salvageable? I mean, should it be salvaged?
Yeah.
Or it's kind of like what we're talking about with the United States. We are in a place of such disaggregation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
A lot of us wonder, can America as it was be salvaged, or does there need to be something completely different? So that's another way to the conversation.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask you, one other thing I wanted to bring in, because we only have a few minutes left, is,
oh my God, how did that happen?
I know, we can do this again. It's those professional Jewish community. You called it the establishment, which it is. Has in their way of speaking about this, and I'm gonna bring this down a couple layers to Jewish high school, a pluralistic high school that my kid goes to, where they have found a way somehow to excise Palestinians from every conversation about Israel. Talk about Saudi Arabia, talk about
that happens,
Gaza, whatever, but like not talking about Palestinians. And the question that's coming closely in my life is the trip to Israel that this school always takes going to interrogate anything enough to make it a trip with integrity. And so I think this is a piece, and this is where we could talk about Hillary Clinton, where a lot of people in the establishment are managing to talk about the crisis of Israel-Palestine without acknowledging the catastrophe of the Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And we all saw the Sarah Hurwitz's talk about how it's the young generation watching TikTok that it's made anti-Israel because of TikTok.
she actually said something slightly, I think she did say that, but she added a piece as well that really, she added a piece about Holocaust education
Oh yeah.
that, yeah,
Right.
that, set people off with good reason.
Yes. So among those are the Democratic establishment,
Mhm.
Democrats in the
Mhm.
United States,
Mhm.
and the establishment who have been pro-Israel and haven't found a way, or are so committed to their donors maybe, that they are still talking about this situation
Mhm.
in a way that aligns with far right billionaires like the Adelsons. And there was just a conference where Hillary Clinton spoke that was sponsored by the Adelsons, where she also made a lot of comments about Israel having a communications problem without really acknowledging that there's a catastrophe
Yeah.
that needs to be addressed.
So two big things there. One, let me start where you started, because you and I have talked
Correct.
about.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and correct me where I've totally gone off the
No,
rails.
no, you haven't gotten anything wrong. No. Um, so first, one thing I just want to say that's very cool is that Stephanie and I really met through Substack, as fellow, badass, overeducated Jewish moms of a certain age,
Don't
who
forget
are
anti-fascist.
anti-fascist. Thank you. I forgot. That's also happens at our age, right, Stephanie? Like,
Yeah.
woo, you don't remember everything. But anyway, who are doing this work and would, and of course would love everybody's support. And we met through Substack, and we've become friends offline too, which is really
Yeah.
cool. And we had a conversation about, you talked to me about the dilemma with, your son, who is, you have this question about, like, do you send him on this trip? And
And it's
it's
not just me, do I send him? It's his, do I want to go?
right. And right. Sorry. My kids are younger.
Yeah.
So at my kids' ages, it's, what my husband and I decide. But right. Your son is, like, on the
He'll
cusp
be
of
18
graduating
in
high
2
school.
weeks.
Oh my God. And anyway, so right. So we're slightly different places in that regard, right? But it's really a dilemma, right? And I mean, I haven't gotten to that point with my kids, and my kids go to public school, so it's, it's different. But I remember when I was teaching Middle East politics at William and Mary, I routinely would have Jewish kids come and say, listen, I'm thinking about going on Birthright. And I know that Birthright isn't going to offer, the kind of, more objective, grounded view, Israel and Palestine. And, as I've gotten here in your class, and, I'm not really sure what to do. And my advice was, like, dude, it's a free trip.
Yeah.
It's a free trip, and you are equipped, and you are a thinking person. And what the hell, like, I mean, obviously in the end their decision, but, like, you have my blessing if you decide that you want to do it. Like, go ahead and do it, even though I have real issues with Birthright.
If you had the internal discussion with yourself, or maybe even external with other people, like, if I were designing a trip, here's how I would do it.
Right.
They need to talk to this person and that person. They need to go here. They need to go there. They need,
Right. No, obviously we would do it, fundamentally differently. But it's hard. You're in a and what I would say is this, like, the question that you posed is it going to be a trip with integrity? I believe were the words that you used. look, based on, I mean, I'm not at your son's school. I only know what you tell me. And what you tell me is that thus far, they've managed to go through years now, including the last 2 years since October 7th, like without mentioning Palestinians. So my assumption is that no, this is not going to be a trip with integrity. I would be very surprised if it were. And then you need to make a decision from there. I mean, fortunately, he has brilliant parents. I'm sure he's a super smart kid. And, maybe it's worth it, right? Maybe it's just worth it. And like you do whatever deprogramming you need to do. But, it's tough.
Well, I think there was an article, I don't remember where it was it, I don't know. I read things from so many different places where a liberal Zionist, wasn't even a liberal Zionist. Maybe it was a Sarah Hurwitz. How do we get the Jewish young people to love Israel? And one of the side questions is, why would you want to? Right? And that wasn't a Zionist, clearly, but I think it's something that we have not engaged with at all about whether. Okay, so Israel is the first sovereign time the Jews have been sovereign since essentially the Roman War, when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and the temple in 70 CE. So in 2,000 years. Now, we were pretty shitty at it then.
And it didn't last very long. Yeah.
It didn't last very long.
Right.
Those were like the original Hanukkah people. Then they had a dynasty. It didn't last very long. It wasn't very good. It was kind of they were vassals of Rome and all sorts of things. But the question that we haven't been ready to ask as a community is, are we better off as a diasporic people and not with sovereignty? Can we do anything well with sovereignty given our history of being diasporic for so long? So I think that's a question that will come by millimeters. But why would you want to inculcate love of Israel? Just as a question, I think kind of hangs out there. I know why. Why?
What's your answer? What's your answer?
Well, my answer for myself is, I've spent a lot of time there with Jewish Israelis, with Palestinians, in Israel, in Palestine, and I want to help move the ability to live the ability to live together without killing each other forward. And I spent a lot of time, in that world.
Yeah.
And I had to spend a lot of time deprogramming from that initial teen tour, with all the founding myths, and it took a visit to Palestine. It took a visit, lots of conversations with Palestinian, people on the street, but also Palestinian academics and Palestinian leaders.
Absolutely.
To really get myself unprogrammed enough to do the work of peace building, which I don't even know is something that is on the horizon for the next half a century. But for my son, who has no relationship with it at all right now, and I don't know. We have family there, and we know that there's a lot of great, wonderful people
Of course.
on both sides, but
Yeah.
but there's also like this possible minority. I don't know whether it's a minority or not, whatever. There's really horrible Jewish supremacist terrorist people in charge right now. So how much does that impact? Like, it's like people coming to the United States right now. A lot of people are like, I'm not coming until, Trump is out. Even though they are like very supportive of us. And there's probably a bunch of people here who are Canadian in particular. It's an open question in my mind.
Yeah, for sure. And I think you and I come down in a similar place in terms of, in terms of our trajectories. I'm not saying it's exactly the same.
No,
I'm
but
sure
it's kind of, in
not.
some ways, it's parallel, but not, because time periods are different. But yeah,
right. But I mean, in terms of, obviously Israel it's a complicated place, period. And it's complicated for me personally, but I mean, I care about it tremendously. And if I hadn't, I wouldn't have invested like a substantial chunk of my career in terms of advocacy, but in a way that obviously, was not uncritical of and not just of particular horrific Israeli governments. I mean, it does go, I think, if we're being honest, it goes beyond any, Israel had a quote unquote change government that was before the Netanyahu government that came to power at the very, very end of 2022, right? This was the Naftali Bennett, Yair Lapid government that lasted like whatever it was, a year and a half or something. And it also sucked. There are fundamental structural issues there that, and an occupation that has lasted for decades, and issues that go back to 48 and before, and everything else. And with all of that, Israel exists. And, it's most likely not going anywhere, even though it has some really fundamental issues,
right,
to be clear. But, for me as a Jewish person in the diaspora, and to be very clear, like, I'm very happy living in the diaspora. If I wanted to go make Aliyah, and sorry, that for anyone who doesn't know, Jewish immigration to Israel, it's very easy for Jews in the diaspora to do that. And we choose not to. I mean, we could, and this goes for, Rabbi Elliot Cosgrove and everybody else is, they could go and make Aliyah if they wanted to. And we choose not to do that. Our lives are here. And at the same time, I do feel that I have a stake in this project, not only because I have relatives in Israel, although both my husband and I do. That's part of it for sure. But, this is a Jewish project, and it is one that, there are parts of it to be very proud of. There are parts of it that are highly problematic. But I'm a stakeholder in it in some way. And, I want my children to feel that too. And also, right, in a way that is obviously not uncritical, and that, sees all of this as, but to feel that they have some sort of a role in it.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And I think that maybe I'm just a control freak. Not out of the realm.
Jewish mother to ever say that, Stephanie.
I am a recovering, somebody said, I'm a recovering control enthusiast. But like, I want to be involved in curating what that story is. I don't know. Okay, we are over time, and I feel like this conversation could go on forever, and we'll have to have a part 2 and however many again. But for right now, Deborah, will you tell people how to find you? Because we have 161 people in the chat
Yay!
right now.
Amazing.
And right, how to find you and to sell yourself.
That's quite a way to put it. Well, thank you so much. So I have a Substack that is still relatively new. It's about 5 months old. It's called The Debrief with Deborah Shushan. Sometimes I publish commentary. I do a lot of live Substack conversations like the one that Stephanie and I are doing right now. And it's basically how I would describe it is kind of all things at the intersection having to do with at least one or more of things like Israel, Palestine, the Jewish American community, U.S. foreign policy, democracy versus authoritarianism. I'm forgetting something else, anti-Semitism often, because that plays into all of this, which you raised, but obviously there's much more to be said about all of that. And so, yeah, so that's what I'm doing over at the Debrief. And if that stuff sounds interesting, I hope folks will come and check it out and subscribe.
I hope you do. She's talked a lot also with Waj Ali, and which I really want to do as well. And I think people would get so much from following you, and also encourage you to follow me if you're one of Deborah's people who made it here or just saw it on Substack and decided to come over and check it out, because I littered some Yiddish words there in the title. I primarily focus on American freedom and democracy, even though I am Jewish and have spent a very large part of my life in the Israel-Palestine space, and care about it deeply. Most of my work here is about how we reclaim a better freedom for the United States in a different way that is better and more free for everybody.
Yeah. So folks absolutely should also subscribe to Stephanie if they're my folks. And I would just like last 2 cents is that, these things are, I think we're all seeing, all of us here in the United States, how, even if you're only interested in domestic political dynamics and democracy versus authoritarianism and fascism.
Ellen talked about the upcoming primary between Ellen Bender, between Dan Goldman and Brad Lander.
Lander. Yeah.
That's going to be a whole microcosm right there.
Yeah, but yeah, I
don't think they're that. I don't actually know what Dan Goldman's politics are on Israel, but it's two well-known, thoughtful, educated Jewish men who are going to be in some sort of dialogue.
Yes, it'll be interesting. But what I wanted to get at is that this issue, unfortunately, Israel-Palestine anti-Semitism has played under the Trump administration, such an important role because they have used, as you stated at some point, the weaponization of the fight against anti-Semitism, against free speech and American democracy, that these issues really come together. And it's important to grapple with them, I think, together.
Well, thank you so much, Deborah. We'll have to do this again. And thank you all for coming. And I'll see you next time on Freedom Over Fascism.